Hey there, welcome back to Cultivate Talks. This is Sam. We're under a palm tree today to continue our little circuit of fruit trees that we're touring around here. We're in the city, we're not at Cultivate right now. Let's get to give you a little update on what's going on at the center. There are two big projects in addition to the ongoing floor project that I think I discussed last video. The floor project is still underway. We're really making a lot of progress on it. We've decided to add quite a sizable wall. Part of the reason why we want that wall is it's not bad that we have privacy from it. That's not really the goal, or not, because right now our neighbors just have horses over there and it's pretty and open. It could continue to be pretty and open. It could get built. Whatever. It's more about shelter, and then also being able to like hang things and have like a wall to exercise against, honestly. If it doesn't have, if it's just even like a wood plank or some smaller scale wall, then we couldn't be out there kind of like doing exercise. I couldn't hang a pull-up bar there. We couldn't be hanging like a boxing bag up there. Hello. And things like that. And so we really wanted something solid and stable for that, and also having a larger, more like cinder block style wall or brick style wall is going to give us the chance to like actually have some art there to remind you of the space that you're in. Because right now everything is super pretty in the sense that you're surrounded by nature, everything's wood and everything's sustainable. That's really lovely, and I want to maintain that as much as I can, but at the same time I would like to have some things on the walls that remind you of where you are and what you likely came to study, which is something along the lines of East Asian medicine, martial arts, meditation, or maybe more formal Taoism. So having reminders of that on the actual physical aesthetic of the property is something that I think is really cool and important. Other things that we're working on actually creating a viable temple space on the property. Still deciding between putting that in the movement, some corner of the movement space, or probably better yet, its own standalone structure. And because of the requirement of a Taoist temple, or an altar in general, but also a temple, that it needs to be facing, the best would be to the south. That would actually put us on one of the smallest roads. So it's not technically a public road, it's a private road, but anybody can get back there. We don't have a gate, we don't have anything like that in our community. And so that would be really interesting to potentially have a public access point. So, for example, for local folks who are interested in lighting incense or offering prayers, or maybe even practicing at a time where I can't be there to supervise an event, to have a section of the property that's almost public. Maybe public with an asterisk of, it would be nice to know all the people that come onto the property, right? And that would be, to be honest, that would be kind of more in alignment with what I think of when I think of a Taoist temple in China, where obviously someone's always there to communicate with folks that live there. But you also have constantly people coming to offer their respects, or to seek guidance, or seek connection, or tourists, or other things like that. You always have that, and that's a really important element of openness of a center like this. And I think in some ways it's very different for some folks to think about offering that kind of almost semi-public space, especially within like the retreat wellness culture of the Western Hemisphere, where you constantly have something kind of like a closed door unless you pay. And that's the exact opposite of what I want to cultivate at Cultivate. And so that having that temple open outwards, it just kind of has to match the feng shui and a couple other things, to not put that on the road itself, to fit in with a couple other regulations and recommendations for how to place a temple. But that may be something that we could accomplish hopefully this year, hopefully before opening, but at least within the first year. Another big project that's a little bit almost too early to fully talk about, and part of me thinks that I'll go back and delete this if it doesn't work out, or it looks like it's not going to work out in the next week, but I am trying to acquire another 4 acres of land from one of my neighbors who is trying to offload it. And what that would do is a couple things. One is that would give us space. It's 3 lots that are about like 1.2, 1.3 acres each. what that would do if we could get that for Cultivate would be, one, we could have capacity to, as Cultivate expands, to look long term, to have on the same basically corner of the street, to have room for up to potentially like 30 people to stay at one time comfortably, instead of right now, it could be like 12 or 14. The other thing other two things that are really cool about that is, one, there's a network of rivers and hills back there. So most of it's unbuildable land, which is why it's going for pretty darn cheap. And for me, it would be lovely to kind of take after what somebody like Joe Hollis did in North Carolina, which is, you can read about it. There's a documentary called Paradise about him, and he's one of the biggest pioneers in the West of bringing in a lot of Eastern medicinal plants and kind of like wild farming them, in the sense of like giving them the space to roam, giving them the space to breathe, and just like letting them do their thing and seeing what environments they like, as opposed to farming them in a more commercial, more controlled environment, just food foresting it, more or less. And that could be a little bit laboratory to be able to experiment with some of these medicinals. It would be a chance to keep that entire corner pocket of the street, which again, we're a kilometer off of any sort of main road. We have one other neighbor back there who has kept their property, mostly forest as well. And apart from our other neighbors who are, just have horses roaming the land. It's open, but it's just horses. And they have, acres and acres. As you drive in, you just see about 7 horses on the land in their respective grazing areas, and it's beautiful, and it's pastoral, and it's wide open. It's very typical of the Guanacaste region of Costa Rica. But what that would do would be also a chance to maintain that forest and make sure nobody else takes it, because the cool thing about it is that it butts up against, there's a river, and then you jump into the public water supply tower and hill, because they put the tower on top of the hill, so gravity helps distribute the water all around town. And so they're not likely to develop that area because it's public water area. And then there's also like electrical lines on the other side of that, which mean that there's a very well-maintained hiking trail for miles and miles into pure forest. And so that would be like, oh, I have like a giant hiking trail behind the property that we have full access to. And maybe someday we put, again, like I said, a little more housing on one side of that, and maybe someday we put like a little hermitage. So if somebody wants to take a little meditation retreat, be in stillness, be completely surrounded by nature with no distractions, you have the capacity to do that in like full woods. Rewild, not even rewild, that area's been wild, it has not been developed. And so that would be a really cool opportunity to steward that sort of land and keep it wild, maybe make a couple adjustments that keep some trails on it and make it, some wild growing foods and herbs back there. And then have that be a large portion of what that land is for. So that would be an idea of that, and that would be what I hope to accomplish with that. And so those are kind of the 3 main updates: the floor, the new land, potential new land, and the temple idea. Otherwise, we're right now also building a small nursery. That's the other thing. We're building a small plant nursery that we can start to propagate a lot of the medicinal plants while they're babies, keep them protected from the wind and extra sun, and eventually extra wind as well. Eventually extra rain when the rains come in May. And also to be able to actually distribute those plants locally, both the local medicinals that really grow quite well, and also the foreign medicinals, the Chinese herbs that we have that, it would be lovely for people to have them in the gardens, be able to take them home and use them. And that's a big mission of the center, is to focus on the medicinal piece that people can actually feel and touch and practice for themselves, and plants are a big part of that. So those are the 4 updates, I should say, on the center right now. So a little rant. I want to keep this one a little bit short because A, I don't have a ton of time today, and B, I think it's just a little more palatable when I look back on the first 2 rants of just kind of keeping them shorter. But we'll try. So what is is what we do wellness. When we talk about traditional Chinese medicine, we talk about Taoist arts. We had a conference through the Taoist Gate Center. Every year I have been the host for the past 4 or 5 years, I think, of the Taoist Gate free community event. We call it the annual Taoist conference. You can come down and you can stay here, whatever you want to do. And you can go and see those for free on YouTube on Taoist Gate's channel. Maybe I'll link it in the description here as well. It'll be down below. And within that, I think it was last year, we were discussing our media editor had put wellness on our title for the year, like Taoist arts for wellness or something like that. And we actually, there's a lot of hair, and I specifically nixed the title of wellness. Because I don't think what we do is really wellness oriented, and I'm not the only one within the traditional Chinese medicine community that feels that way. And it's really interesting because right now a lot of traditional Chinese arts are becoming very, very popular and very they're being brought into the mainstream. I think as one of my friends put it, thank you, Infinity. It's like as we reach this kind of dystopian stage of capitalism in the West, a lot of people are looking to China for oh wow, they still have morals, their quality of living is livable, there's a lot of traditional wisdom that's still present in the culture, things like that. There's a big attraction, and the proof is in the pudding. We're seeing a lot of these TikTok and Instagram videos of you found me at a very Chinese time in my life, which I could make a whole separate video on. And within those videos, there's a lot of wellness tips from Chinese aunties or your Chinese grandma or something like that. And that's cool, I guess, in some way, because it's yes, it is wellness, the stated definition of wellness to make people in a well state of health, mental, physical, spiritual, is definitely what this is. Why do I feel so cringed up when I hear wellness applied to Chinese medicine or Taoism? Is because of one of the things that I've seen recently is wellness has these presuppositions that they don't explicitly state these things. But when I see people who do wellness in kind of a modern way, there are a couple things that I notice, right? So one of the things, and these aren't meant to say wellness is bad, but maybe there are assumptions that I don't agree with. One of them is very obvious, is that that obstacles and discomfort are signs that you're not well. And I think it depends on your vehicle. In wellness, if you're just kind of a regular person going through life and you're not feeling well, yeah, of course you want to get out of that not feeling well. Of course, that's natural, that's good. So what exactly am I trying to put into words that I have this kind of gut reaction against that? And that's because for example, when we engage with these Taoist energetic arts, we engage with meditation, qigong, maybe we engage with fasting, maybe we engage with intense martial arts training. The goal is not to get rid of discomfort. It's often to use that discomfort as the only vehicle. That discomfort itself is the vehicle that allows us to transform and change. If we take out that discomfort, then we do not change. And so that is a necessary part of our struggle. And I think what sometimes can happen, and this is not true for all of wellness, but sometimes can happen within wellness culture in a modern sense, is that discomfort is viewed not as something to go through, but something to be avoided. And I see a lot of folks that don't really do a lot of hard work, and it's interesting to see some of these appropriated Chinese concepts right now on social media in the wellness circle, because it's these things definitely do work, but you're not going to know the power of taking some of these herbs if you don't do it multiple times a day. If you don't take your tea, you're not going to realize the results. And that includes if you have a day where you are just so stressed and you can't do anything, you still got to take your tea to get the result. In meditation, for example, there are certain points of the meditative process, and I would say even early on, as we are like returning Jing to the body, and I have to make a whole separate video on this to give some vocabulary and context. As we're returning Jing to the body, and that starts to maybe transform into Qi or something. And again, if this means nothing to you, that's fine. But as that transformational process starts to occur during meditation, as my Shofu Lindsay Wei likes to compare to, when water begins to boil and change state. If you get to the point where it just begins to boil and it gets a little weird and uncomfortable, you don't know what to do with it, and you just take it off the water, off the heat, you take your attention away from what you're doing, the water does not change its state. And there is no transformation. And so I think within quite a few of these Taoist and traditional Chinese arts, very much the point is to get to that point of discomfort and handle it intelligently. And so I don't think you get that in modern wellness culture. And that brings me to my second point, which is I think there's some amount of supervision. Modern wellness culture places a lot of the emphasis on the individual. Traditional Chinese medicine is a community medicine, is a cultural medicine. It knows intuitively, all of our teachings know that we are a part of a family. And like this auntie knowledge or grandma knowledge that's coming through on social media is still very different from having an actual aunt or an actual grandma who's on you and saying, this, you need to be fixing this, and reminding you every day. That's a form of love. That's sort of criticism. That's sort of honesty. And I don't see that in wellness circles. And that's not something like, I don't see it often. It's like, I haven't really seen it. There may be some like men's and women's groups where people challenge each other a bit, but by and large, I don't see, first of all, there being enough connection within the wellness world for people to have like the connection to challenge someone, because that's hard, that's annoying, that's difficult. That's like, if you don't know someone so well and they immediately challenge you, it's very common that someone's just gonna be like, I'm not gonna hang out with you anymore, that's ridiculous. But we need it. It's very important to be in community, and to have our wellness culture in the West be so heavily focused on the individual of all the things, I need to do this, I need to do that, it's like, oh, like, just chill. Like, actually, like, you need to be in community with folks. If I had no connection to the Taoist community, if I had no connection to Qigong folks, and I could never have connection to those folks, then it would be almost ridiculous to say it's like a wellness or good for me practice to be doing my own thing completely isolated. But even when I'm in communities where no one else is practicing these things, because of technology and because I've physically been in places where I feel very connected to teachers, to fellow practitioners, to our general community and lineage, I know that like I'm so like present with the community. It was shocking to me to go to the Wudang Mountains and see these 100-year-old practitioners in their huts and see how connected they were to each other. And to think maybe perhaps some of what is depicted romantically as these hermits that like, you know, are alone for a long time, you know, even these mystics that are alone, they're often having dreams with immortals. They're dancing with the stars. They're very aware of how interconnected we are. And so this modern wellness view of like looking at the person as one whole that you can just like plug and play different things in, it doesn't work, it doesn't jive, it doesn't fit in with the fact that like humans are our environment. That is an indigenous wisdom that is present within Taoism, that is present within every indigenous culture, is a connection to our community, a connection to our space and land. You could come up, or you could be there. And that is an integral part of being a human being. The last and third point I would say about a description of maybe why I'm not so hot on some aspects of wellness culture is that I do feel like it's a hodgepodge. I do feel like they're pulling different things from different traditions, and if you don't have A, supervision, B, community, and then maybe C, honestly, like being far enough down a path to be able to really prescribe these things, then these vehicles for change, right? These meditations, massage techniques, like movement, all this other stuff, then we're just kind of guessing, and it's the blind leading the blind, as opposed to within these great indigenous spiritual traditions, which I believe strongly that Trenton Longmen Taoism, which I'm involved in, is very much one of those traditions, and I know that there are others that people would feel strongly, and I don't know them personally, but I believe you. I'm not trying to say that my way is the only way, but you, like, to be just playing these things from like different indigenous cultures, what it does is it leaves a lot of room for us to fall into the trap of just choosing what feels good instead of choosing what's transformative. And that becomes problematic, because then we're just a group of people that likes to do what feels good instead of wants to like get to the other shore of if I'm using the dual cultivation model from Dragon Gate Taoism, sorry, I want to bop you in the head, but a very emphatic point here. We need to have some sort of realization to, like on the nature of reality, and B, we need to be like focused on helping other people. That's the two sides of, for example, within Taoism, our morning and evening scripture. The morning focuses a little bit more on the self-realization, the worldview, the finding clarity and stillness to a point where we can perceive the nature of reality, and that gives us a lot of freedom and peace and kind of like free will, honestly, as opposed to just reacting to everything. We can jump out of the cyclic karmic cycle of all sentient beings suffering, and perhaps in scripture, the basis of that is to how do we help those who are suffering. And so sometimes within the wellness culture, it's like we're only helping ourselves and we're just doing what feels good and we're not going anywhere. That's what I see. And if that doesn't apply to you, great. Don't worry about my criticism. But it's present within the wellness community, and I don't think it's helpful. I think I said this on a talk that I didn't air, but I have a buddy of mine who's Larson Di Fiore. He's a professor of contemplative studies at Brown University. He's a doctorate level. Yeah, he has a doctorate. I don't know how you say that, the way I was trying to say it. He always talks about one thing, which I think is so profoundly interesting, is that he's like, you can take these predominantly for the modern psychological lens, right? You could take these Buddhist practices, these Buddhist meditations. Jon Kabat-Zinn, the founder of the modern mindfulness movement, he studied at the Kwanum School of Zen in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I studied there. He was not a senior practitioner there. He took those things as still a student level. That's not to say it's wrong, but he took those things as a student and kind of became a teacher in a different environment when he pulled them out of the Buddhist tradition. And when I talked to Larson, this point several times, is that what happens is that when you practice a meditative practice from within a tradition, it's meant to sometimes wake you up. For example, within Buddhism, it's going to dissociate you with your identity in some way. It's designed to do that. However, in like a Western psychological sense, which is what a lot of our wellness practices are based on, because that's what's in the culture around mental health. When you have that dissociative moment, now you have a mental illness. And because people who are giving out these meditations have not necessarily gotten to that dissociative point and gotten past that dissociative point and gotten further along the path to be able to teach it, the issue with that becomes that you have gone through you've gone through a spiritual experience that was meant to happen with the practice you are practicing, but you are practicing without context, without community, without authentic teacher. And so you feel like you had a psychological break and you don't have anyone to help you. And that's irresponsible. I strongly believe that that's like, we have to be holding ourselves to a higher standard if we want to be teaching these things. These are not weekend courses to teach. That's really what I would like to say is like, if you want to make something into like a dumbed down version that has no power, be clear that you're dumbing it down and taking the power out of it. But if you're trying to teach like a real authentic spiritual vehicle, meditation, well, even like a health practice, this could to some extent be applied to some health practices where you need to get to a breaking point and push through it. But you need to have that sort of moderation. You need to be in community with a teacher, and you need to have guidance. And if you don't have that, well, then I don't want to be associated with you, and I'm not going to use wellness on my on my conference marketing. When I run Dallas Gates Conference, I am going to ask to take off wellness because I don't want to be associated with it. I don't think it's responsible. It sets people up for failure, or to think that these practices are not as transformative as they are, which does them a disservice. I could talk at length more, but that's where I want to leave it for today. I gotta run. Thanks for watching. If you want to watch more, subscribe. If you want to say something about it, leave a comment. If you want to argue about it, I probably won't argue about it, but if you want to shed some light on something that I'm missing, please, because I am not all-knowing in any realm of anything that I'm talking about here, except perhaps the practices that I know. So thank you for being here. I'll talk to you soon.